there can be no more sketches in the beginning of the video, because even though they attract more viewers, most of you only watch the first 30 seconds and then ignore the rest of the video, and Google thinks that my videos are really crappy because no one wants to see them. So either I need to make the content really good and make you stay on the video, or I have to make the intro a little bit more boring. So in this video, we're going to look at all the variable types in quick succession, because this is the last video on variable types I will make. Maybe I'll do some more in the future, but only if you specifically ask for it in the comments. So with that said, let's start look at the list of variable types. And at the top in DataFlex, we have a Boolean. Very simple, true or false. And as we dive into working with numbers, there's quite a few variable types to work with. We've been looking at integers, reals, and numbers, because those are what I would think the most commonly used, perhaps decimal as well. But there are a few, so I just want to highlight them here in the list. So you have short, which is a smaller number than an integer. If you want a really large integer, you can go for big int, and then you probably have enough numbers. You also have the unsigned, and that means that it does not contain the negative numbers. It only contains from 0 and up to positive numbers. Then you have the real numbers, the numbers, decimal and floating point numbers, that are good to work with if you have a bunch of decimals you need to keep track of, or fractions and stuff like that. And then you have the currency variable type, and that is specifically tailored for working with currencies that usually do not have more than 4 digits as decimals. I would probably go with a regular number for those as well, but hey, if you want really large amount of currency, well, why not use the currency variable type? It could also be good if you want to highlight in the code that this is really a currency variable. You could use that. Then you have the char and uchar. When working with large sets of strings or text, it's recommended to use a uchar array. It is also recommended to use a uchar array if you're working with binary data, but the regular char is probably more targeting to the old regular ASCII way of typing things with 127 locations. But it's more or less just for one character of each position. So it's like a very small integer. You could use it as a very small integer as well. So yeah. Strings. Here you also have a bunch of different varieties. You have the W string as well, where you have the UTF-16 type. And I'm not really 100% sure if this is the one we're supposed to use if we want to store values that are Unicode from now on, because I think that string would also be able to manage those, as the entire DataFlex has gone over to Unicode in the later versions. I haven't tested that, but if you know something about that, then please write it in the comments below, or I'll write it in the description if I have time to look at it. Then we have the D word, and that's some special type for Windows applications if you want to update the registry or interface with Windows API calls and stuff like that. Then moving on to dates and time and all of that, we have the date variable, which in the documentation says that it's going from the first of the first year one. But as we tested in the videos about date, we could actually only get down to the year 100 with a date variable. And we could, on the other hand, get a lot further into the future. But that might also have something to do with 32-bit compilation contra 64-bit compilation. So I wouldn't be too certain about that, but in all cases. But if you're on a 64-bit compilation of DataFlex, it seems like you can get up to year 58,000. Datetime is a more reliable date variable type, and it also goes from a negative 32,000 up to a positive 32,000 in the years, and also have time and milliseconds available if you want to use those. So even if you're only working with a date time might be a better variable to work with than the date variable type. And then we have time span, and that contains a number of days up to 65,535 days, and hours, minutes, and seconds. So you can use that and just set a span, and you can use that to add or subtract from a datetime variable. You also have a time variable that is kind of separate from the other ones, just to store a simple time with hours, minutes, and seconds. If you want to use some calculations on them, you should convert it into a date time variable first. So I would probably use a date time variable either if I'm using it, just using the date part, or if I want to work with the time part. So I think those are perhaps specific for certain purposes when you're working with a database or something like that. Then DataFlex also has some special variable types that we haven't really looked at the moment. One of them is row ID, which you will see quite a lot if you look in DataFlex code, because row ID is used to reference the record in the database. And DataFlex is a record-based framework. So what's going on when you do a lookup is that you find one record at a time, and then you can store that record ID. Then you can find another record, and you can use the record ID to do a lookup for the old record ID to go get those values as well. So you can work with record IDs in different ways, and there are special functions in DataFlex just for managing record IDs. So you might want to look into those a little bit more. Then we have the handle, which is also widely used both to manage references to objects, but also to manage reference to files. If you're going to read a file, then you create a handle for that file, and then you access the content of the file through the handle. So those are some ways you work with handles. Then you have the long pointer, and a handle is just a alias of a long pointer. So those are the same thing. You also have a long pointer, because why not? It's more or less the same. I'm not sure why we you would use one before the other. And then we have address, which you can use to get the address of a memory position. So if you create a variable, you can get the address in the memory for that variable using address of function. And I haven't seen any case where I feel that I need to use it. And you should also be aware that if you move around a lot, or if you add a lot to the memory, that position might not be valid after a few iterations. So it might actually be that the data that you stored in that position has been moved by the operating system before you try to access it the next time. So you might get invalid data back. So I wouldn't trust that too much. And pointer is an alias of the address. So again, use them with care. If you really know what you're doing and you want to use them, feel free. And the last type that we have in DataFlex is variant. And I write a lot of PHP code, and in PHP you can just create a variable and store anything you like in it because PHP will figure it out. Variant is a little bit like that you can store an integer or a string or a date or what have you, and it will try to do its best to figure out what type it is and manage it appropriately. The reason you might want a variant is because you might read some data from an external source and you're not sure what type that data is. So in that case, me personally, I would probably use a string and then do my own evaluation on that string to see if it might be a date or a digit of some sort or number. But you can use the variant as well to receive those values. And if you want a copy of this document that I've been using to reference the variable types in DataFlex, I have a link in the description below that you can go to download the PDF. And that was all I had for you in this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and in the next sets of videos we're going to look into how to write code in DataFlex and some of the features you can use to write your application. Now you know how to store data. Now we need to figure out how to use that data, and that's what you have to look forward to. So until then, have a really nice holiday and see you next time. Bye bye.